John Dehlin, host of Mormon Stories podcast, thank you so much for being part of Three Questions.
It's my pleasure. It's an honor.
You were excommunicated from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints about 5 years ago, and at the time you said that you still consider yourself a Latter-day Saint. Where are you now in your faith journey? Do you still consider yourself a Latter-day Saint?
During the time of my excommunication, it was still okay to use the term Mormon. And I'm guessing that what I said is I still consider myself Mormon, and I think that's still true. I've always loved the church. I had a very positive experience growing up in the church. I feel like so many positive qualities that make up me are associated with my upbringing in the church. And I just love Mormons and I love the Mormon people. So in all those ways, I still consider myself very Mormon. I've still never tried alcohol. I've still never tried drugs. I'm faithful to my wife, and I believe in being honest and optimistic. So I feel very Mormon, but my beliefs probably aren't orthodox. And in that way, I'd be different than most mainstream Mormons, I'd say.
How do your core beliefs now differ from what they were as you were growing up?
I think growing up Mormon, there's a lot of focus on the past and on the future. So the past being our history and what's happened and doctrine and theology, and then a real focus on heaven and the afterlife and trying to make it and the nature of heaven and God. And I would say the biggest change in my beliefs is that my core focus is on living the best life that I can right now, and making the biggest difference that I can in the world today. And I used to know everything, and now I feel like when it comes to cosmic things or existential things, I don't know very much, but I'm content to live in the present moment. And whereas before it was always like, I got to get to the celestial kingdom, so I got to obey all the commandments. Now if I do good or live cleanly, it's because I want to, not because I'm gunning for some position or that sort of thing. But I think I'm the most Mormon, ex-Mormon on the planet in terms of my behavior.
Have you ever had a desire to reassociate with the church, to become rebaptized?
So the way that would have to happen, someone who's excommunicated requires First Presidency approval. And we've seen just recently some people reapply for membership and have that turned down. So I guess I don't have a lot of optimism that in 2020 the church would want to rescind my excommunication. But there'd probably need to be a few changes before I'd be willing to do that. But I haven't closed that door.
A few changes. What do you mean?
I think the church has come a long way. There are a lot more, when I really struggled with the church, it was probably because I had learned all this history that I wasn't taught that was true about the church, and the church tended to hide that and punish people who talked about it. In 2020, the church is far more open and honest about its history than it ever was. So that's no longer a problem for me. But I think the church still struggles to find a place for unorthodox believers, people who maybe don't believe everything the church teaches literally, people who maybe can't say it's the one true church or the only true church, or who maybe don't view the Book of Mormon as a historical document but still find metaphorical or mythical value. I think the church is still struggling to find a place for people like that. I would want to make sure the church was okay with someone like that. And then I would want, I have LGBTQ family members who probably would feel betrayed if I just jumped back in and became a Mormon again. I would need to make sure that the church was a safe place for them, so that they didn't feel betrayed by my reaffiliation. I would love to see the church maybe put women on a bit more of an equal status. There's some things I'd like to change. I'd like to see the church stop excommunicating people. But I still love so much about the church, so that's true.
Why did you start Mormon Stories podcast?
In 2001, when I went through my own faith crisis, the internet was just kind of gaining steam, but there was nothing to support a Mormon who's going through a faith crisis. And I saw so many people suffering with depression, with anxiety, marital distress, even suicidality, over going through kind of a dissolution of everything they believed and held dear. So after I realized a few years beyond that you're absolutely alone when you go through a faith crisis and that the church has no resources for people who go through that, I started Mormon Stories to be a support to people who are going through a faith crisis or who had important things to talk about, but that they couldn't talk about them at church. So if they're gay or lesbian, if they're a feminist, if they have concerns about the church's history with race or questions about its doctrine or theology. In 2004, you couldn't talk openly about that stuff. And the church wasn't open about that stuff, and the church excommunicated you if you talked too openly about it. So I started Mormon Stories naively with this idea that if we just talk openly about things, we can figure it all out and stay faithful, but also well-informed. And the thing that makes me most happy is when somebody says, I no longer feel so alone. I no longer feel like I'm crazy. And mostly I can find friends and community to go through this journey with. And so that's why I do Mormon Stories, is to help people in that situation.
At the time of your excommunication, your local leaders accused you of apostasy and of trying to draw people away from the church. Is that what you were trying to do? Is that what you're trying to do with the podcast?
There's never been truth to that claim. I've always interviewed faithful Mormons on Mormon Stories. Even last week, I interviewed a faithful Mormon, someone who resigned from the church but then came back. It's a great interview. And I've always been able to produce for my priesthood leaders reams of letters from Mormons who actually felt that they were able to stay in the church because of Mormon Stories. It helped them feel like they had a place. So I've never been trying to pull people out of the church. I have had as a goal to talk openly about problems in the church and to educate Mormons about the factual history. And sometimes becoming aware of factual church history does lead people out of the church, but that's not my fault, and that's never been my intent. And to this day, I have dear, close friends who are in the church. My parents are still in the church. My sister's still in the church. And my in-laws are in the church. And I'm very happy, and I'm happy for them. If someone can find... This life is so hard, so crazy, so difficult, that if somebody can find healing and community in this crazy world, I'm for it, in or out of the church. So there's no truth to that.
On the Sunday night that you were excommunicated, you said you needed to find a, quote, new truth, new community, new growth, and new joy. Have you been able to do that since you were excommunicated 5 years ago? And what does that look like? Yeah,
I have been able to find that. There are tens of thousands. You know, one of the great things about Utah is that it's got so many Mormons, but it's got so many post-Mormons. And so there's so many amazing post-Mormons in Utah who are thoughtful and kind and loving and sophisticated and intelligent. So my wife, Margie, and I have found great families that we hang out with, that we connect with, that we talk about family and relationships and even spiritual things with. So that's been great. The Thrive communities that I've started with some friends have really started to spread that. So there's 50 Thrive communities now all over the country.
Explain what Thrive is.
Thrive is just simply a community of post-Mormons looking to heal and grow. So it's not about, it's explicitly not about criticizing the church, not about even talking about the church, not about tearing the church down. It's basically saying, if you're going through a faith crisis and you need support, you can find a local Thrive group to help you. And if you want to heal and grow beyond Orthodox Mormonism, find a Thrive group, and we'll do book clubs and we'll do get-togethers and just have a social engagement that makes you happy and healthy. Mormons of all people know how important community is, and I loved my association with the Mormon community. I miss it. Sometimes I wish I could go back. But post-Mormons deserve community too, and they're healthier when they have it. So Thrive is simply a way for post-Mormons to find the types of friendships and community that they enjoyed as Mormons.
When someone has a faith crisis, and because you've had so much experience, not only with your own, but with others who have had faith crises, when they go through a faith crisis and the tenets of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints no longer work for them, they don't feel like they work for them any longer, describe what that does psychologically, emotionally, spiritually to someone who goes through that. What is it that they are feeling? And because I would imagine that active Latter-day Saints are sitting there going, oh, I couldn't imagine not being married to my wife forever, or having my children as part of our family forever, that kind of thing. What happens when you go through a crisis and those tenets no longer work?
The best way I can describe it is, imagine if a house had feelings, and then imagine if the entire foundation of the house was pulled out from under the house. How would the house feel? The house would feel terrified. The house would feel like everything that had been built upon had crumbled. And that's how it is. When you lose your Orthodox faith in Mormonism, you lose your identity, you lose your sense of meaning and purpose in the world. You can lose your morality, you can lose your source for spirituality, you can lose your friends, you can lose your community, you can lose your marriage, and just the way that you make sense of everything, not to mention the way you make sense of death and the afterlife. So it's pretty much like losing everything that matters to you. And I'm fortunate to have been able to study this as a psychology PhD. And what I've learned is that faith crisis is closely associated with depression, anxiety, divorce, and even suicidality. It's a very serious thing. People don't understand how serious it is because we're uncomfortable talking about it. But it basically feels like you've lost everything, and you're as a naked adult child having to rebuild your identity, your community, your morality, your spirituality, your sense of the world, and your friends and family. And it's just completely disorienting and scary. And so since the church hasn't really been able to help these people, that's what we do in Mormon Stories with the Open Stories Foundation, with Thrive, is we say, hey, these people are still loved. If you believe in God, God still loves these people. They deserve health and happiness and community. So we'll gladly pick up that baton and help those who need it.
There must have come a time when you realized that when you look back, you realized, okay, well, this is where my faith crisis began. If you could go back and make the small or maybe even big decisions that led you down that path to a faith crisis, if you could go back and make a different decision that didn't lead you through everything that you just described to us, would you do that?
Definitely not. I'm very happy with where I am today and with the path I've gone down. It has been super hard to be publicly excommunicated, to lose friends, to lose family, to carry kind of public shaming about that. But everything I learned was factual and true. And in so many ways, I've been vindicated. The things that concerned me back in 2001 or 2005, the way the church treated LGBT people, the way that the church taught me about race and racism, the things that they hid about the church's history. If you fast forward to 2020, the church has acknowledged all of those problems, and they've even started trying to fix it. So I almost feel like I was just a little bit early, and maybe we helped kind of shine a light on these issues to the point where the church would actually start feeling like they needed to address the changes. And in that way, I'm even proud. I'm proud that I've been a small part of helping the church improve, because I still love the church and its people. And I could not have even helped the church improve if I hadn't have gone down this road. So I'm healthier. I've helped a lot of other people in their lives, and I feel like I've helped the church. So how could I dial that back? I wouldn't want to undo all the good that we've done, honestly.
Tell me how you have been treated since your excommunication, both socially emotionally, spiritually? How have your friends and family treated you and your family?
When we lived in Cache Valley, we had lived in this tight-knit Mormon community in North Logan for 12 years, and we pretty much lost all those friends. And it's not that they were bad people, it's just that when the church brands you as an apostate, everybody's afraid of you. And so most of those people just disappeared. It was like we were in a ghost town. And we stayed there a couple more years, but that just became unhealthy for my family to just constantly live amongst people that used to care about you and that just kind of erased you from their memories. So we moved to Holiday in Salt Lake City, and we've loved it. We've made so many dear friends here. We do have LDS neighbors. They've treated us very kindly. But it is very jarring. You know, when I got excommunicated, my number 2 child was Laurel's president. My number 3 child was Beehive's president. You know, we were in it. And so it's really disorienting to your whole family, not only to have them ripped out of their community, but to have them be treated as bad, and then to have to recreate our infrastructure as a family and create new friends and new friendships. I'm not going to lie, I think it's been really brutal, and it's an awful thing for a family to go through. Excommunication's awful enough. A public excommunication where you're branded an evil apostate when you're literally trying to help the church, that's super hard. And I think all my family now would say they're glad we did it, but it was painful. And at times it feels very dark, it feels very alone, it feels very scary. But it's been amazing too. So it's just one of those very difficult things that has a lot of blessings associated with it.
I take it that your wife and your children followed you out of the church as well.
We were very careful with our children to let them have their own journey. So we didn't say that leave the church is bad. In fact, there was a part of me that my heart that probably still wanted my kids to stay active and faithful, just because I had such a great experience growing up in the church. My wife attended my excommunication with me, and it was such a horrific experience for her that she resigned the day after I was excommunicated, sort of just because of how bad that experience was. My kids have not remained active in the church. I have close family members that are LGBT, and including within my own family. And so I don't think that at least those members of the family feel very welcome right now at church. And then the others it just wasn't working. But we still look upon the church and Mormons with a lot of love and affection.
The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints teaches that faith is to hope for things which are not seen but which are true. How would you define faith, and how does it manifest itself in your life?
I still consider myself a person of faith in this way. There are all sorts of things that I do to try and make the world a better place, but you never know if you're actually making the world a better place, or even if you do make the world a better place for a short amount of time, will it matter in the long run? And for me, faith motivates all my activities. It's just basically saying, I'm not sure that I'm doing the right thing. I'm not sure that I'm helping people in the long run, or even if I know I'm helping people, I'm not sure it'll matter in 100 or 500 years, but I have faith that it somehow will make a difference. And I've traded certainty about God in an afterlife for a real focus on the here and now. But I still, even if there isn't a God or an afterlife, I still have faith and hope in humanity that somehow we're building towards something more important. And if there is a God and or an afterlife, that's kind of a bonus to me. But I'm finding life to be so satisfying now that can be meaningful to me whether or not any of those other things are knowable.
Active Latter-day Saints watching and listening to this interview will want to know about the spiritual witnesses that they and many of the guests on your podcast say they have had about the fundamental tenets of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, namely the divinity of Jesus Christ, the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon, and those kinds of things. When they say that I've had a spiritual witness that these things are true, what do you say to them?
My personal belief is that everyone's spiritual experiences are sacred. And so in the tens of thousands of people that I've talked to about their faith crises, almost all of them say, but I've had these spiritual experiences I don't know what to do with. My response is always, hey, those are sacred. Their meaning for you may change over time, but you don't have to throw out those experiences. And if I ever meet a missionary or a faithful Mormon that comes to me and bears their testimony, I have no interest in trying to argue with them or dissuade them or pollute or reinterpret the experiences that they hold most dear. I just say, man, life has so many hard moments. If you've got some special moments that mean a lot to you, you hold on to them. Now, there are people that genuinely feel like they can't both leave the church and still believe the same way that they did, and so they have to make sense of that. And everybody's got to do that work for themselves. And there's all sorts of explanations for why people believe things. Very sincere believers flew airplanes into the Twin Towers, and I think they were very devout in their beliefs. Now, did God tell them to do that? It's hard to say. But for me,
it's hard to imagine.
It's hard to imagine.
Yeah.
But for me, it's never been important for me to try and tear people's faith down or take it away from them. I think that might be evil to have that intent. I still believe in doing wrong and trying to like take away something that's sacred to somebody. I view that as wrong.
Did you ever have that kind of an experience in regard to Jesus Christ or the Book of Mormon or the power and authority of the priesthood? Did you ever have a spiritual experience that would lead you to say, I know these things are true?
So I went to early morning seminary in Texas, Katy, Texas, as a devout Mormon, and I had a very orthodox kind of Bruce R. McConkie literalistic seminary teacher, and he taught me that miracles were real and that you could pray and that God would answer in very literal ways. So I remember going to the Mesa Temple in Arizona my very first time and praying to like see an angel or to see the spirit of the person I was getting baptized for. And I fasted and I was worthy and nothing happened. And I remember later when I was about 16, I read the Book of Mormon cover to cover. I was faithful and committed and seminary president and I prayed. I followed Moroni's promise to get that answer, and it didn't come. And I actually remember praying, not getting an answer, getting up, and then getting back down on my knees and praying again, thinking, and it never came the way that I was taught it would come. Now, did I have very meaningful, moving experiences growing up Mormon? Absolutely. I served a mission. I was branch president twice, and I remember like certain general conferences where I just felt this overwhelming feeling of inspiration and energy. And at the time, I associated that with receiving a witness that the church was true. Now I probably look at it differently because I've realized that Baptists and Lutherans and Methodists and Catholics and Jews and even atheists have incredibly positive, uplifting experiences that are very emotional. And sometimes I think it's the people around us or the conditioning that influences how we interpret those experiences. I still hold them as special and sacred, but now maybe that experience doesn't mean that the Mormon Church is true. It just means that whatever I was learning at the time or whatever I was experiencing at the time was a meaningful, positive thing. But to have these incredible feelings and to then interpret, well, that means the Mormon Church is the one and only true church on the face of the earth. For me, I realized that might have been a leap to draw that conclusion, but that was kind of the conclusion I drew at the time. And that's, again, I don't like to disassemble those meaningful experiences, but I do think that feelings are more complicated than sometimes we treat them within a church context.
You now have your PhD in psychology.
I do.
To what degree are religious feelings, feelings of the spirit, to what degree does psychology say, well, that's just a chemical reaction in your brain, or some kind of chemical or hormonal reaction in your body that is telling you or making you feel that way?
It's a great question. So I really appreciate that the ethical code within the field of psychology teaches psychologists what I just told you, which is that people's closely held sacred religious experiences are to be treated as sacred, and it's never a psychologist's job to try and mess with people's sacred beliefs.
That.
No, or worse, you could lose your license for trying to take people's faith away from them. Mm-hmm. And I've just never been into that. Now, having read some books like Mistakes Were Made But Not By Me, or The Demon Haunted World by Carl Sagan, there is a neuroscience to brain chemistry, and there are certain parts of the brain where if they're stimulated, things like spiritual experiences happen. And the frontal lobe is the part that I'm aware of. If you get hit in the brain in just the right way, you're going to have kind of an epiphany of a spiritual experience. And people have it and believe in UFOs, and people have it and believe in, all sorts of things. And so it would be really hard, and I've never met anyone who can really tease out the difference between neurochemistry and a spiritual experience. And sometimes LDS people that I've talked to have said, no, there's a real difference between feeling positive emotion and feeling the Holy Ghost. But when I was in the church, I couldn't tell the difference between being inspired by a movie that I saw and the feeling that I got at General Conference. The content may have been slightly different, but that feeling of emotion and uplift was very similar. And I think that's just a universal experience that does generate in the brain. But having said that, I don't think we know everything, so I have some humility about my conclusions, and I'm open to further information as it comes. But I think the brain is much more powerful than we give it credit for. And I mean the wiring and the chemicals in the brain. It's a very powerful thing.
Yeah. Well, we know of it now. I mean, certainly we'll know more in the future about that very kind of thing.
Yeah.
Considering all of the controversy that surrounds some of the policies and procedures and even doctrines of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the social furor that gets going over those kinds of things. Considering that and then juxtaposing it with all of the good that the church does in not only the world but in the individual lives of its members, is there not a point at which you go, for all of the issues that I have with this church, I think the good things that are coming out of it and my involvement in it is worth putting up with all of that other stuff?
For me, or just for mankind?
For you and mankind.
Well, my situation is different because the church kicked me out, and I didn't necessarily want to leave it. So I don't have maybe the same option that other people would have. But generally speaking, I make ex-Mormons sometimes really mad when I basically take the position that I believe that the Mormon Church, warts and all, still does a lot of good for humanity and can still be really positive for people if they have the right leadership and in the right time, and if they have the right traits. So obviously if someone's gay or lesbian or transgender, I'm not going to say, go be Mormon, you'll have a great experience, right? And if somebody's a feminist and they really believe, in education and that a mother should work outside the home, I'm not going to say Mormonism's your place, But for so many people, I see the church providing them with community and meaning and purpose and spirituality and connection and a thriving family network. And so I am the first to call out the church when it makes mistakes or hurts people, but I still believe that the church is a net positive for many, many people who are in it. And I applaud and celebrate that they love it and enjoy it. And most importantly, in 2020, when you see, and again, post-Mormons may be angry at me for saying this, when you see the incredibly positive steps the church has made in the past 5 or 10 years, whether it's being more open about its history, the Joseph Smith Papers Project, promoting Rough Stone Rolling, the gospel topics essays that it's come out with, to rolling back the November 15 policy with LGBT members, even that Utah is now willing to support the banning of conversion therapy for youth. The church is renouncing its past racist policies regarding blacks and race. It's still in the Book of Mormon, so there's still, I don't know how the church is going to deal with that, but how can you not say that the church has made incredible progress in the past 10 years? And if it's able to continue into the next 10 years with the same rate of positive change that it's made in the past 10 years, I think the future can be really bright for the Mormon church and the Mormon people.
Look into your crystal ball. What do you see as the future of the Mormon Stories podcast and your involvement in this new community in which you find yourself?
So we've been doing Mormon Stories now for 15 years. I think it's the longest running podcast, one of the longest running podcasts in the world ever of any type. And we just keep doing the same thing. We cover current events. We interview people going through a faith transition. Something that's interesting is it turns out that only about 1/3 of the people in the world who are baptized LDS remain active in the church. So even though so Mormon Stories will always cover people in the church, but it often covers people who are struggling with the church or leaving. But the fact is that's the average LDS experience, is to join the church, have some struggles with it, and sometimes to leave it. So we'll always cover people's faith journey, but we'll always try and have a good balance and to be fair. And most importantly, the focus on Mormon Stories going forward is about healing and growth. How do we heal as a people? How do we heal as progressive and post-Mormons? How do we help the church heal? And how do we grow and move beyond it? Because no one's served by constant attacking, constant negativity. It's bad for the church, it's bad for Mormons, the Latter-day Saints, it's bad for post-Mormons to just live in constant criticism and negativity. And most of my post-Mormon friends have just gone on to live happy, healthy lives. But sometimes you can get sucked into this controversy and really get trapped in it. And I never want to symbolize sort of like trapped in negativity and criticism. So part of the Thrive initiative and part of the mission of Mormon Stories going forward is really just, how do we make sense of the world? How do we form beautiful community? How do we build bridges between believers and non-believers? How do we keep families together? How do we keep families from separating? How do we help the church improve? And then how do we form communities outside of Mormonism that promote positive, healthy, pro-family behaviors? And that's all I want to be associated with. And I really appreciate the chance to kind of share a little bit of my world with you.
Well, John Dehlin, host of Mormon Stories podcast, thank you so much for being part of 3 Questions.
My pleasure. Thanks, Bob.